So I got up this morning and decided I would try to reverse engineer what the heck kind of format I was actually using in my pilot. Now I wrote my pilot for this Shadows of Carcosa thing several times. And this is actually the sum of unfortunately, several years of poking at this thing to try to make it work. Going back and forth between deciding whether or not it was a live action show or an animated show. And I've decided there's little chance that I could produce it as a live action show with the budget that I want it to be. So I thought, all right, let's knuckle down. Let's do this as an animated show. So understanding that it would be something like a 25-minute format, having seen something similar to that on Netflix, in particular with Castlevania. Now, I haven't watched any of it, but it appears to be sort of drama, but animated, adultish. So I figure probably pretty good way to go. Now, I realized that I was writing front to back. Like I just making the pilot, it was just like this happens, and then that happens, and just kind of knocking things off my to-do list so that the story that I wanted to tell was getting out on screen. What I wasn't doing was adhering to an act format. So looking at that, something like a 30-minute show, very easily that divides into 3 10-minute acts. And if you throw a teaser maybe up at the top of that, and maybe a little tag at the back, but I don't know, that could also be part of that third act. It means that we're looking at these little 10-minute increments here, which would be okay. So to start figuring out what my format was, I just went ahead and I wrote down Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, giving myself enough space on the page to maybe take a couple of notes. I also knew that I like the idea of a little teaser happening before the title. That's a little grabber. It's a good standby. Rather than throwing titles at the head of a show, I like to get them hooked right away. So I knew that a teaser was going to be part of it. And maybe the pilot doesn't have that, but subsequent shows will have that. So what would be the purpose in a second episode? And this is really the effort to do this, was for me to be able to, I don't know what to do in the second episode. This is like a real common situation. I've cornered my heroes into this situation, and I could try to get them out of it, but then what happens after that? And how do you sustain it? How do you go from 2 to 3 and 3 to 4 and forever? So I knew that coming out of 1, zoom in a bit here. Coming out of 1, I would have to remind the audience of a previous cliffhanger. So in the classic mold, you would watch, it's Sunday night, 9 p.m., the show is out for the first time, and it gets watched, and you have to wait until next Sunday to see the next episode. So you've got a 7-day waiting period to be able to find out what happens, unless you're a streamer, and at which point you might be a binger. And if you're a binger, you can go right to it. But there's even with a binger where someone could allow the thing to continue playing, you want to convince them that to continue playing is the most important thing in the world. And that's where ending previous episode are going to end on what the hell's going to happen. So to begin, I would remind the audience of what was happening there. Watching my model, which was HBO's True Blood, in terms of tone, if not scale, because that's an hour show and this is a half-hour show, I would always see that they would leave us hanging at that first episode and then possibly answer the question, possibly get them out of it at the beginning of the next one. But you might, because of how complicated that problem is, you can't always get them out of it in a 2-minute teaser. So maybe you're getting them out of it, but possibly you're revealing a new problem in the process, and maybe you're just going to, hey, remember what we were doing? Well, that's still a problem, and after the credits here, I'll come back and get you out of your previous peril. So, presumably, all of the immediate problems, and we should say that that's the most important thing, the immediate problems from, let's call it episode 1, are finished pretty early in the show. Maybe 4 or 5 minutes into the show. So let's say something like 2-minute teaser, maybe it's the maximum you'd want. Maybe the title sequence is 30 to a minute. So we're down here 3 or 4 minutes and they've solved that problem. So I asked myself, what is Act 1 about? If it were, if it were happening to me, what would I need to do? If there were these sort of global problems, where would they be happening? And if there's sort of internal conflicts, where are those going to happen? So I figured that with Act 1, we're going to regroup and analyze what we know. Okay, so the good guys go, oh, we survived that. Well, what happened? Well, this happened. That means that the bad guys know this. Oh, we're going to have to X. Possibly at that point, new facts will come to light. Oh, so they know that we have this weapon. Okay, well, we're going to have to move our headquarters, something like that. I would also describe this section as the consequences of the escape. So they might have gotten out of what it was that was happening up in the teaser and in the previous episode, but there's fallout from that. Maybe the bad guys know something now that they didn't know before. Maybe we lost one of our characters to the fighting, something like that. Consequences of the escape. Now, an act, if it's 10 pages, it's a lot of time, potentially, in terms of like stuff going down. So we probably need to move the ball forward for the bad guys. Bad guys gain an advantage. So every time I write an episode, I have to figure out what did the bad guys... And I like to do this from every character's standpoint, but it takes a long time. This is why a writer's room really comes in handy. So I like to go down each character's sort of track, the good guys, the bad guys, and figure out for each person what's happening. Okay, so Ted goes here. Well, what's he doing at this point? Oh, shoot, I forgot to figure out where he is, and you have to kind of do that. Think of it as if you're the actor. If you're the actor and you're reading the script for the first time and you're looking for your parts, is your part good? And if you're a fan of this particular character, okay, I'm a big fan of Frank's character. I want to know what he's up to. If you lose the Frank thread somewhere along the way, then that audience member is going to be upset with you. So just work through everybody's pipeline and make sure that they're all doing something interesting. They can get sidelined for a little bit, as long as you come back. And if they are an A character, you're absolutely following them. If a B character, it's a good idea to give them kind of probably an A, B, and C moment in the script. So you're touching base with them 3 times or so. And maybe a C character, you're doing it once per episode or something. Depends a little bit on the size of your cast and whether this is a continuing story or these little one-offs. Okay, to that end, remember I just mentioned these B characters. It's probably a B story. And I was thinking that my B stories would be about character development stuff. I think I wrote a note to myself down here. Yeah, here we go. B story is character development bit. That could be backstory. Like a lot of these sort of supernatural dramas, they don't give you everything about a character up front, right? And you find out a lot about them through flashbacks to their past, which lets you open it up slowly. It lets you, if you're a producer, it lets you offset some of that production value to later. So in the case of True Blood, the main vampire, Bill, is an ex-Civil War soldier. He was turned at the end of the Civil War, so He's to do these period pieces back when he was a Civil War soldier. You wouldn't want to do all of those up in the first episode because people would come to it and they would think, okay, this is a Civil War show. Well, it's not that. All right, so Act 1 wraps up. Between Act 1 and Act 2, we want some kind of a mini cliffhanger. And that's where I think this one comes in hand. The bad guys gaining an advantage. So what's the thing that would happen just before the commercial that might occur right there? What is it that could occur there that can fling us into Act 2? And if it were a commercial-based project, it would keep you coming back after the commercial. Make you want to continue watching. So, Act 2, the bad guys have some kind of advantage. And if I'm tracking their movement, I would go right down to here and say the bad guy advantage worsens. So Act 2 is about dragging our good guys down to their lowest point, possibly. That's typically where that happens. In the middle of the story, the good guys are sinking lower and lower. But that's only one thing. I need to get 10 pages out of this. So I remember I set up a B story, so I'm going to do some B story beats. If I want to have this to be a deep show where the characters have a lot of color and depth, I'm going to provide something like this, internal conflict. Now, this could be good guys fighting within the group. Hey, I don't want to do it that way. No, you got to do it this way. I'm in charge. Good guys versus good guys. Could also be the good guy versus themselves. Some sort of crisis of identity or doubt. And that's good. That helps you to bring your good guys low. But I also want to have this kind of big picture in my show. I want to know what's happening in the world at large. I saw this gently with True Blood, where they would hint at kind of the bigger scope. Like what's maybe the government doing? What's maybe the vampire organization, like I think they call it the Authority in there. What is the Authority up to? So I'm going to give some screen time to what the global problem of the show is. That's my C story a little bit, right? If I have these kind of one-off, one per episode visits from bigger entities, this is where I might stick it. Act 2 is typically a really hard act to do because 1 is all set up in action, 3 is all conclusion in action, and then 2 you've got to, if this wasn't set up complicated, then this is thin, and then this kind of fizzles. But obviously, I ideally want some kind of a pretty cool cliffhanger here again. Just something that throws us into that third act. Okay, as I mentioned, I'm going to keep that B story going. That's your B character, so if you're visited 3 times, some kind of visit from them in here. I put it up at the beginning because I was trying to remember it, but it's not the most important thing, so just figure it's in here somewhere. I think this is probably the most important thing here. The initial bad guy advantage is lost. You recall that at the beginning, our first act, they gain some sort of advantage, which in the second act it worsened, as you can see up here. Now they lose that advantage, but a new threat surfaces. And in that occurring, the global problem moves 1 space on the game board. It's kind of a broad, wishful statement. I don't know. Maybe it's a case of my C character is some kind of large, big threat, some sort of global threat. So an example might be in mine, I've got my A guys are my heroes. And I've got some B heroes who I'm going to pay off later in other episodes. We'll call them second-class heroes here. But also the bad guys. Bad guys don't get the same amount of screen time as our heroes do. And they're the B threat. To the big global threat, which is the C guys. Okay. So if the C is the bad guy government, let's say, then the B guys are the agents, right? So C is this all-encompassing term to mean the threat at large. Handmaid's Tale, the government, the Gilead government is the big picture, but in the day-to-day operations of the good guys versus the bad guys, you're dealing with these B people. You're dealing with Fred, Waterford. You're dealing with Aunt Lillian, whatever her name is, the mean sort of school marm character that likes to beat people up. So if you have a look here, I've suddenly, I've made a mess, but I've created a shopping list. If I go in and I make sure that I'm doing each one of these things, I've got a lot of stuff. Oh, what can this be? Well, what did I set up in the last episode? So my last step. This was happening, so that means that my A, B, and C here are this, that, and the other. So it all, hopefully, if you write the format right, it becomes this fill in the blanks machine that you can just put in your own answers to each of those questions and be rocking. Boy, Photoshop is really weird on this. Anyway, there it is.